All right, changing the master cylinder, slave cylinder on a 2003 Mazda Miata. If you look in the engine bay, it'll be right here in the right corner by the driver's side. This is your brakes, that's your clutch. If you look really carefully and up close, you'll see there's one bolt here and one down below. So there's two bolts holding it with one line going into it right there. So this is it, just like the old one. We'll bolt this up. The rod clutch goes in here, pushes it in, causing the pressure with the fluid, and this is where the hard line will go in. This is a 10 millimeter, and the bolts holding the part up onto the car are 12 millimeter. We're going to see if we can loosen them up. We're going to take our 12 millimeter wrench and we're going to loosen it up, and we want to be careful not to bust any lines, and it is pretty snug, so we're going to use this second wrench. One little trick that you can use is to hook the closed section onto the open section and use that as leverage, and that did the trick. We'll do the same on the bottom. On the bottom, I feel like it'd be easier to use the socket. It should be. Okay, the bolt that comes out is not allowing the socket to seat in there, so we're going to need a long socket or an open socket. We could use the 12 that we have right here that we loosened the top bolt with. It's a little tight to do the lower bolt. The socket that I have here is a bit on the short side. The bolt that's going through the nut is not allowing this to seat in the nut. You don't want to strip it. You can maybe get a longer 12 millimeter if you don't have these tools, but if you have an open socket, it's pretty neat. They have a hole right through them so that the bolt can go as far as you need it to. I'm going to put this together and see if this will work. If not, we'll try a longer socket, but anytime we can use any of the tools that we have to make it easier, why not? And sure enough, now it's seated. There we go. And we get it. So now that we've broke them loose, they're still on there snug. We want to break this line as well, because once you let this loose, it'll be a lot harder to remove this line. Like I said, that's a 10. Put it in here somewhere. Here we go. So we want to loosen that as well. Again, you want to be careful not to break this line. This is a hard line. You don't want to create more issues. So we're going to break it loose. Make sure I'm not rubbing it off. Goodness gracious, it is pretty tight. May have to spray it with some lube. I'm going to get one other, starting to round off a little, so we want to make sure not to continue. We're going to get a different tool or even spray some lubricant to try to loosen it up. All right, so we ran into some problems where I was using a 10 millimeter and it was starting to strip the nut. I didn't have any flare wrenches. I got a 10 millimeter flare wrench, and it made a huge difference. As soon as I put it on there, broke it loose. So the difference is those little teeth right there. Highly recommend that for the job. I also moved this over just to give us a little more room. It's one nut and one bolt, so it's not that big a deal. But anyway, we'll continue the job. The way this works, it just kind of goes right in the line. You fit it right through the hole, and then just like a regular wrench, it goes on there. The only difference is those teeth really grab onto that nut, helping it keep from stripping, because it is very soft much easier with the right tools. Of course, because we're breaking the line loose, we're going to introduce air. So we'll have to bleed the system when we're done. And I'll show you all how to do that as well. All right, so we have got the two nuts out and the line loose with the flare wrench, and what the part looks like, we're going to replace it with the new one. All right, guys, I'm putting the new part in. I would, before you actually attach the part and make it immovable, I would try to put this hard line in. That way you can adjust it. Since it's hard, you can kind of move this part around, and that way you can thread it in. And you don't want to cross thread it. You want to thread it by hand. Make sure it's on there nice and straight. And then after you put this in and tighten it, or at least tighten it halfway, then you can put the other two bolts on. All right, guys, so the two bolts are back on. The line is attached. Like I said, I attached the line first, then slid it in, tightened the bolts. Everything's back in place. We're putting this piece back on that we removed. You don't have to remove it, but it did give us way more room to mess with the hard line. So we're just putting this back. In a minute, we're going to bleed the system. So we're going to put some DOT3 brake fluid, and that's what it requires. That's what it calls for. We're going to fill this container up, leave the top off, and bleed it from the slave cylinder down below. I'll show you that in just a second. All right, part is back in. We filled it up with fluid. We're fixing to bleed the system. So you always want to get fresh fluid. The way to bleed the system is you have this little part right there where the wrench is. That's part of the clutch system too. That's the other slave cylinder. You basically want to open that wrench. That little nipple there will open up and let fluid out, also let air out. And the way you want to do that is you'll have someone pump the clutch 2-3 times, hold it down, open that, then close it, then he can release the clutch. Pump it again 2 to 3 times, open that up, close it again, then release the clutch. You never want to release the clutch with that open because you'll suck air in. So you're basically pumping, opening, pumping, opening, and that basically will push fluid through, also letting all the air out, pushing the air out. All right, let's get started. Hold it. All right, pump. And hold it. Pump. Hold it. Pump. Hold it. Pump some more. All right, guys, and just like that, the car is running. We just took it for a test drive after we bled the system. We checked the fluid, rechecked the fluid, make sure that everything was set, nothing was leaking, and it was still at level. So it worked. Initially, we had changed the bottom cylinder, and we did not change the master slave cylinder and the clutch cylinder, just the bottom slave cylinder. I recommend you change both at the same time. What may have happened is now that part was new down below, which had gone out, and now it put enough pressure into the system that the seals up here ended up failing. And what we would end up having is we would lose the clutch. It would work fine, and the part was engaging like it should after we replaced it, but after a while, you almost like you had air in the system. We kept bleeding it, and it just kept failing on us. Again, almost like it had air in the system, and that's because the seals were giving way up at the master cylinder. Hopefully this was helpful, and you can do the job. It cost about $22 for the part. Give or take, if you get OEM, they can run up in the 100 and above range, but we went to just a local auto parts store and paid about $22, $23. We're in the fluid. Like I said, always get new, fresh DOT3 fluid. Hopefully this video was helpful. Like and subscribe, and that would be helpful to me. Thank you. I wanted to add a little bit of a note. When you're bleeding the system, you want to make sure that you keep the reservoir full so you don't introduce any air. And the other thing I never mentioned is where you bleed the system, the slave cylinder is on the passenger side underneath, right beside the engine. Just wanted to add those notes. Thank you again. Like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment.